Let me riddle you. We love it as children. We were fascinated even by the people who tend to it until we learn that we shouldn't. We all produce it every day, and yet we don't like thinking about it. Yes, people. Today we're talking about trash.
It needs all the elements. The legal framework has to be set in a way that it becomes more attractive again to use the material rather than discard it.
Trash is actually on the growth. There's a lot of talk on the circular economy, but there is a missing link to talk about the need to well-staff, well-trained, well-equipped, and give the means and the numbers and the working conditions to the people to actually do that.
It's not upcycling that is going to save the world. However, definitely, if you can acquire some of these skills, or if you can think in this way, you still manage to do two things: to reduce waste material on our earth, and the second is that you decrease the number of raw materials being produced.
The second component is offering options. There is still too little offer.
We really need to have an intervention at the beginning of the process, and then we need to work on international standards, on production standards that actually are thought for. And I mean, honestly, we have the technology to do that.
Welcome back to the Standard Time Talk Show. I'm your host, Reka Kinga Pop, and on this program, I talk with guests from all over the world about things that matter in Europe and the matters Europe should think more about. We release new episodes every second week, so don't miss out. Hit the subscribe button and set 12 to 57 alarms so you never miss an episode. By the way, you can also watch the show or listen to it in a podcast format on Display Europe. And don't forget to turn on the subtitles in one of the 15 languages. Dealing with waste is the most important function that keeps society going. The second you stop handling garbage and sewage, the cholera timer starts ticking and you have only days left until diseases start to wipe your settlements. The bigger the city, the bigger the problem too. You can't really compost your way out of millions of households in a consumerist society. There just isn't enough space and facilities to solve this problem individually. In many places, this is at the core of public services run by municipalities, employing vast numbers of public service workers. And let's be honest, every kid loves a good garbage truck worker, and any smart mom does too. Hello. I think we can afford to brag here a little. Vienna's Waste Management Directorate, the MA78, are a highly valued and trusted organization who have beautifully organized recycling yards where people can come and visit, pick up composted soil for their houseplants, dispose of their larger items, and even pick up usable items. I got this book from there and a coffee machine. Moreover, in Vienna, we have the most fun garbage incinerator. Designed by the superstar of playful architecture Hundertwasser, this facility is truly fascinating, but not everyone is so lucky to have a great relationship with trash. In less fortunate cases, which are numerous, private enterprises compete for these contracts and often even mafia get involved. For instance, the Camorra in Naples, Italy. Trash is lucrative, but it's also rather hazardous. Albeit many think that the logistics of taking trash from point A to point B are a no-brainer, it couldn't be further from the truth. Your bins require advanced combinatorics. The collection, selection, and treatment of garbage is a feat of science, engineering, and logistics, and when not done right, it creates very tangible problems, and smelly ones too. I love Brussels, the capital of Belgium and the European Union, yet they're probably the trashiest capital in Western Europe because of coordination and technological issues, for instance. And that's just the top of the trash heap. The disposal of garbage, especially communal waste and hazardous materials, are matters of life or death and potentially responsible for massive pollution. Quote, in 2022, the total waste generated in the EU by all economic activities and households amounted to 2,233 million tons, or 4,991 kilograms per capita. That's 5 tons of waste per person. Interestingly, only 9% was generated by households and a whopping 38% by construction. Undoubtedly, Europe has a trash problem. But the European Union is quite steadfast in regulating its way through such problems, Yet it still shies away from a firmer handling of industrial waste, which constitutes the vast majority of the problem materials. Moreover, the enforcement of these rules are left to the member states, who often can avoid or abuse these duties. But since I'm Eastern European, I can find no greater comfort than finding somebody wealthier who is worse off than me. So I often think of Brexit. Indeed, 2/3 of the British Isles have decided to depart from the tyranny of a voluntary union, and with the EU, they also left behind crucial laws and regulations that have kept their affairs in order. In the past couple of years, private companies, unbridled by environmental laws, soaked British waterways and the North Sea with poop, and burning garbage has become the most polluting form of energy there. It's grown substantially, though, since exporting rubbish has become less of an option for Britain. We already have an episode on sewage, so click on the card up there or the link in the description to listen to my guests and I talking crap. But what's worse than creating a lot of trash? Well, in my opinion, it's to dump it on your neighbor, who's already dealing with their own stuff. According to Greenpeace, 40% of the UK's plastic waste was sent to Turkey last year, and that's 210,000 tons. Quote, Malaysia's environment minister said the government had sent back 150 shipping containers of illegally imported plastic waste to their country of origin, 42 of which belong to the UK, end quote. Yeo Bei Yin said the move was to avoid turning Malaysia into the garbage dump of the world. Fair game. But Schadenfreude is a fickle mistress, and the Brexiteer debacle can only comfort me so long because the rest of the continent has its own problems and gigatons of it. Member states of the European Union sent 20 times more plastic waste to Turkey in 2020 than in 2016. That's more than 20 times over increase over 4 years. According to Eurostat, in 2021, iron and steel exports amounted to 19.5 million tons, accounting for more than half of the waste exports from the EU. Holy moly, that's a lot of trash. Of course, Europeans have always been good at building mountains of trash. Sometimes trash heaps got so tall right beside medieval city walls that besieging armies merely had to climb up to scale the walls. A testament to the ancient city of Rome, the Monte Testaccio is a literal mountain of trash where terracotta amphorae were dumped for centuries. They used to be used for shipping olive oil in them. Now it's a fun archaeological site, except the majority of today's waste does not decompose the same way organic materials do. Chemical pollution, plastics, and hazardous materials pose a sincere threat to natural environments and humans alike. So, however we try to reduce, reuse, and recycle on an individual level, how much can this help if companies and governments aren't changing also? Daniela, the writer of our show, and myself are both trying our best to live plastic-free, and it takes half a job just to try and find alternatives to the compulsory packaging at supermarkets. So, how can we fix our trash issue? We have invited 3 guests who help us with their valuable insight on the topic. Pablo Sanchez Cantellas is a representative of EPSU, the European Public Service Union based in Brussels. EPSU influences the policies and decisions of employers, governments, and European institutions that affect public service workers, their families, and communities. Petra Wintner is a project manager of Carla at Caritas Vienna. The Carla stores have been a hub for usable intact goods donated by people who no longer need them. On the one hand, people are provided with clothing, tables, and bed linen from this collection. On the other hand, long-term unemployed people are given a chance to re-enter the job market. And I bought most of my stuff from them. Osho Yanai is a human rights expert with a passion for upcycling. As the founder of Ursus Plus and Upcycling Productions, 2 Hungarian enterprises, she is dedicated to promoting the principles of a circular economy through the upcycling of discarded materials. Hi and welcome. Thanks for taking the time to talk trash with me today, which is one of my favorite topics. You may say it's a peculiar interest, but I think everybody's interested in trash until they're taught not to be. So let's start with you, Petra. You work with Carla, which is a very specific project. Please tell us about this and why specifically Vienna in Austria seems to have a very special relationship with garbage.
Okay, Carla is the major reuse project. It is big in Vienna. It exists in all of Austria and other countries as well. The concept is that we accept donations in kind. And in Vienna, we accept them from everything that you can find in your home. Basically, you can donate to Carla. That is still usable, still works. So starting from clothes over electronic goods, books, but also furniture. And then we sell it in the Carlas, which is 2 big locations in Vienna. And now recently we opened a 3rd permanent one. So we try to really get the value out of the donation that we get from people. And in addition, we have programs where people who cannot afford to pay kind of market prices, they get vouchers through Caritas, and so they can also shop at Carla's at a lower price.
I'm one of your customers, so everything here in the Viennese apartment that I rent, well, maybe everything but like 2 things: beds, pots and pans, carpets, clothes, these boots, and so many other things are from Carla, and I'm a huge fan. I met this concept many years ago in Stockholm. That's called Stockholm Stadsmission, which at least back then used to fund homeless care specifically from its income. Why does Vienna have this very specific, very loving attitude to used stuff as well as garbage? Is this like a cultural thing?
Whereas in other maybe cities, the trash compactors are being hidden and the trash pickup is tried to be something that's in the background. In Vienna, it is orange and really like for everyone to see.
It's
and
beautifully decorated places, like yards.
Yeah, and it's not only in Vienna, I've also seen this on the countryside in Lower Austria. Saturday afternoons is you go to the trash, you go to the Mistplatz, that's where you meet people. And we have the Mistfest every year in Vienna.
So you have a festival dedicated to garbage.
Yeah, it's called...
Is it any good?
It's supposed to be fun. I have to say I've never been. It's at a different Mistplatz every year.
Well, sorry, we'll come back to festivals very soon because Orsi deals with the trash from festivals. But let's talk with Pablo first, who joins us online from Brussels. It seems to me that the European Union is very good at coming up with regulations. The track record of actually enforcing those policies seems to be much spottier. So tell us about your work in this field and specifically in the handling of used materials, garbage, waste management, and where the problem may lie.
Hi, well, thank you for the invite, and I'll briefly introduce us. We are a European trade union organization covering the EU and beyond. And one of the sectors that when I work for is the local and regional government, so the municipal sector. And if there is one thing that all cities, bigger or small, actually have as their core task is to collect the trash. And yes, it is true that the European Union is very good at producing legislation telling what to do, particularly on waste management and wastewater, which is very much linked because that's the less cool side of garbage, the one that we flush. The issue is that very often policy is thought without the people that actually have to implement it. I mean, and that just not happens at the EU level. It also happens at the global level. We like to talk about trash, but we hardly ever talk about the people that actually work in that sector. Statistics talk by themselves. There is mostly men, but 1/3 of the staff working in the waste, in the recycling, in the circular economy would be municipal employees or regional. You have sometimes inter-municipal companies and so on. 1/3 will be in the private sector, bigger companies. The incinerators in some countries are private and some of the management and so on. And then the other third is we do not know. And it's the informal economy. But if you really walk in the streets of some very nice cities such as Barcelona, you see undocumented people who are, of course, not in trade union, picking up and going to recycling centers and living off that. Trash is actually on the growth. There's a lot of talk on the circular economy, but there is a missing link to talk about the need to well-staff, well-trained, well-equipped, and give the means and the numbers and the working conditions to the people to actually do that. Not just recycling centers like the one and that happens in very many cities, also here in Brussels, but also policy needs to make the system work. I mean, we have more and more difficulties and that's something we got anecdotal evidence, but also talks, is like it's becoming more difficult to recycle stuff.
First of all, small comment, Brussels seems to me the trashiest, dirtiest European capital among all of those that I visited, and I haven't visited all of them, but it's extremely dirty. So Brussels, the city, seems to have some serious problem with trash management. All the children are infatuated with the waste management workers, as in like the people working the garbage trucks, which is fascinating. And then at some point we're taught, nah, that's not interesting anymore, don't touch it, don't be interested. But some people don't lose that interest for some reason. Oshi, why are you knee-deep in trash all the time?
Thanks for asking. In fact, I just came back from Berlin when I was like picking big festival tents for like 2 days. I think it all has to do with me wanting to save the world. I started as a human rights activist and I keep doing that, but now I think it's more the green revolution, so to say. You might be aware of the shrinking civic space in Hungary, which also meant that I kind of needed to shift my word-saving passion into something else. The reason why I work with discarded materials, I do call it trash to be like more outrageous, but it's actually discarded material. It means that it's still very good for something. I'm doing it because as a creative person, I thought that I'm very interested in giving them another function. Now that there's circular economy here, I've been doing this for 10 years. Voila, the two things are matching just perfectly.
Carla specifically works with people on a social employment basis, a lot of them. Can you tell us about this?
Reuse is a very work-intensive activity because in comparison to manufacturing something in a linear way where you can optimize everything and machines can do most of the work, it is a very manual activity. For now, at least, humans are still the best at assessing an item. Can it still be reused completely as it is, or does it go into another stream? It offers a good opportunity to employ a lot of people. The project is mainly for people who have trouble getting back into the workplace. And luckily, I think it has been more and more recognized that we will need this type of training more if we want to really become a circular economy, because we're actually lacking the skills in that respect as well.
Oh, you thought that was all we had on trash? You couldn't be more wrong. Our writer Daniela Univaso has interviewed Greenpeace Turkey to talk about plastic waste exports from the EU. So listen to it on Gagarin, the Eurozine podcast. Link is in the show notes. And now, back to the conversation.
As I said, these initiatives are similar. So you talk about Brussels. Here in French, it's called Le Petit Rien, which is a similar system, social work, and so on. And it's interesting because they have been recently on strike, which is not what you would think of a social project linked to garbage or trash or recycling. Small initiatives that were doing the same have been closing down because it's becoming more and more difficult to recycle things. Things are designed more and more to be thrown away. As long as legislation is not enforcing to the big companies that I'm not going to mention, but everyone knows, to the big Swedish furniture companies that everyone ends up buying furniture from, to ensure that things can be recycled, that not everything is plastic, that things can be redone. The problem is for initiatives such as Carla, it becomes a real challenge to be able to redo things so people can reuse it. And the second issue that is very problematic happens a similar thing with water management and all the debates, is that when we talk about recycling and the circular economy and so on, we are talking about 8% of the total waste production. meaning production is the generation of waste in society. What the statistics tells us is that construction generates 1/3 of all the waste in a society, and the other third is manufacturing and mining. Because if we just tell to the, 95% of the population that are still generating household, well, even if we reduce by 50% tomorrow, is a reduction from 8% to 4%. 2/3 is these two sectors that basically they get away with murder.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's always this sort of recurring problem of individual responsibility, and I compost even myself all the time. And there's these people like us, like Osje and I were talking about this before the recording, that we grew up without really a universal concept of garbage, because especially if you grow up in a village side, like I used to spend my summers with my grandmother, there's no garbage. Some of it goes to the hens, some of it goes to the dogs, some of it will go into the stove. So there's
the rest
a use
for the pigs. Because the pigs ate up everything, yeah.
Yeah, of course. So there's leftovers and there's raw material, and some of this goes on the garbage heap that the hens will be busy with for years, and that's their amusement park, which I very much respect. But right now we live in an economy where the consumer cannot live completely zero waste. I respect the initiative, but it's not really realistic to put the onus on all of the consumers. But as you say, also the vast majority of the problem materials are not generated by the consumers. But as you say, there really isn't a proper sort of policy and demand and environment to enforce this on the industrial scale. Also, you do workshops with people and you teach them how to upcycle things, but you also have a very specific attitude to this. So you don't want to teach just the one thing to people. You want them to learn a whole general sort of worldview. Can you tell us about this?
I think upcycling, also what Pablo said, is a very tiny slice of this whole big circular economy, and it's not upcycling that is going to save the world. However, definitely, if you can acquire some of these skills, or if you can think in this way, you still manage to do two things: to reduce waste material on our earth, and the second is that you decrease the number of raw materials being produced. So originally I started off as a brand, but then I realized that the amount of discarded materials I use, the pool toys, the broken tents, is not enough. In an earring, what is that? Nothing. And basically I now go to companies and I ask them, okay, what discarded material do you have and what do you want to do? Do you want to, give Christmas present to your workers? Then I'm gonna design something for you from the material you have. Or maybe we want to have a workshop because, companies very often have workshops, they have team building activities. Why don't you just do something with your trash or discarded material? And they usually love it a lot. So yeah, I want to inspire people to think a little bit different about all these discarded materials and all the potentials they have.
I'm still sitting with this figure that Pablo just shared, that construction is responsible for 30% of the waste produced. I keep returning to this idea that the reason this economy is organized this way is because the additional costs, or sort of the, so to say, secondary costs of, for instance, treating waste, not calculated as integral to whatever we're doing. For that waste to go somewhere and be handled, that seems to be expected to be a public responsibility. But why is the construction company or the construction industry in general, who are arguably one of the biggest corporate power, not responsible for bearing the costs of it, or not responsible for using technologies that produce less of it? So how do we even approach this? I'm a bit lost for ideas here.
It needs everything. It needs all the elements. The legal framework has to be set in a way that it becomes more attractive again to use the material rather than discard it. The second component is offering options. There is still too little offer. For example, we have a project that's called Cala Depot, which is a special project for reused office furniture, where we get most of our donations from big companies that really, redo their whole floor of office furniture. And we and the second company in Austria were the only ones make it possible that this does not end up in the trash. The activity has to grow. And then the third component is this whole mindset idea, this awareness building. No matter whether I'm a private consumer, whether I'm someone in a company making a decision, we're starting to have customers who are companies, who are teams within companies who say, okay, we have now this space that we're going to use for 2 years and we want to completely fill it with used furniture.
Us who are more engaged in this field, I think we can also give them ideas or inspire them. What I started to do, and again, my sector is just so small and I'm alone and I'm just so much I can do, but for example, the big PVC banners that companies need for advertisement, which I think is legitimate, they want to make money. I try to convince them to already know when they produce this, what will happen to this. For example, all these PVC banners are big, but when you upcycle them and you cut out small things, sometimes they are just white. So maybe put little dots on it or make it already exciting now so that it's still in line with your brand. It still looks good, but when you upcycle, because you can't really do anything else with the PVC banners and the building mesh, it's just huge and massive. We experts, I think, can just help them change a little bit, and I'm sure that there's room for every sector to like make some improvements.
I mean, if I may jump in on this, I don't know if the camera is gonna be like good enough, but this is a wonderful folder I have from an advertisement campaign of the city where I'm coming from, Barcelona, and they did these folders that are actually extremely waterproof and resistant. But the point here, and I'm totally agree, is if you force, by the force of the law, in the designing of objects, to actually thought so they can be reused, then we'll actually mean business when we talk about the circular economy. But we're not doing that. And the reason why this is not being done is that many things that are produced are actually thought as waste, but waste is a commodity. So, and the recycling companies, private for-profit companies, take waste as what it is, a commodity. And then what's the incentive on reducing the raw material that generates you profit? There is zero incentive because you're making money out of burning it for electricity or selling it at weight. So we really need to have an intervention at the beginning of the production process, and to be very strong and say, this cannot be used, this should be used, this designing should be used. And then we need to work on international standards, on like production standards that actually are thought for. And I mean, honestly, we have the technology to do that. It's cheaper to buy another shirt in the fast fashion industry that go to someone to resew it. It becomes actually cheaper for many products, so people don't do it. And that is the actual situation in which we find ourselves, with the recycling being more expensive, so therefore there is no economic incentive. But that can be changed. It's relatively easy. That is what this debate should lead into. Is like, okay, do we want to reduce the number of things or not?
I do think that it's not just about profit, because there's you and me and us here, who for us money is also important, and we live off money, but we also started to have values. Me, instead of being rich with some, I don't know, producing products, I'm digging trash and I'm making these type of folders so that maybe one day somebody will be inspired and da-da-da-da-da. But I do believe that this type of work eventually will lead in 20, 30 years to those CEOs of industries where value will be important again. In Hungary, I actually have very big clients coming to me, like this big sports chain, who are going for profit, but we have discussions about how to reduce tent waste at the festival, because value also started coming in for companies. Again, of course, I'm talking about Europe, and I'm talking about like very bubble, very niche thing yet. I also believe that everybody has to do as much as we do. And I do hope that with my little activities, for example, those CEOs who will be leading these companies in 20 years will have as part of their internal value system, and it will be their business decision, just as it is for me.
This debate should lead to policy change. So there are things that become illegal, so people don't do it. So then you basically build an opportunity for those that say, use my product that I can recycle. But of course, if things are thought for being recycled, when you design a product to be reused, to be able to be changed, to be able to be repaired, well, that's not about the program of obsolescence, because we're gonna get into another debate. But I mean, it is important that this becomes the standard, the norm.
It won't be able to scale it if the moral choice always has negative financial consequences for whoever is taking it.
For me, upcycling is not to be a designer, but as I said, to save the world. And I was thinking so much about it, and for me this was one of the most important things, to make it affordable so that it can become mainstream. And because of that, for example, I'm not into like big design which costs a lot. It's not that these things that I produce for the companies are like high design, but they are still upcycled and affordable.
The biggest factor in here is ultimately money, and we're always talking about money. Money is relation between people. Money is not like a hard-earned, like existing thing. It's a concept, and it's a concept between people. So what's being saved on the most is actually human labor, human cost. Fast fashion industry, the perfect example. We also have an episode on fast fashion. Check it out. It's going to be up there in the card. The fast fashion industry is quite so quote unquote cheap and extremely toxic because people are paid pittance or even less than that for this. Incredibly horrifying working circumstances. By the way, not only outside of Europe, although mostly outside of Europe, but even inside Europe, within Europe. So I think the labor cost effect also has to be counted in there, because it strikes me that we tend to pay and appreciate the people the least who are the most essential. So waste management are the most important civilizational functions without which we die of cholera like tomorrow, right? Why don't we appreciate these people?
For example, the seamstress jobs in Hungary are going to be extinct soon because everything goes to China. So now with this factory where I'm working together, I'm actually teaching all these women who were sewing like big brands how to sew trash. And they've been working there for 40 years. They see, they're like, oh my God, what this is. And now they can't wait to have me in when I go to the factory, because they love this idea. And another thing, going back to the costs, I think it's also important to say it's not about money, it's about the cost, but the cost here is our earth and our home.
Today we are hosted by Kaffeesatz,
a nice community place and cafe at the house Gleis 21 in the heart of Sonnenviertel in Vienna. Bring your children, bring your grandma and everybody you know, because they have great coffee and a nice shop in there as well.
Thanks, Kaffeesatz, for hosting us.
At the end of, middle of December, the European Labour Authority, which is an institution that is relatively new, based in Bratislava, had a joint labor and police investigation in a waste processing plant in Budapest, and they basically found out a big number of Romanian workers. So this is all legal, intra-European. I don't really like this term of illegal immigrant. I mean, no one is illegal. You might have or not have papers, but that's neither here nor there. And these were workers that were taken from Romania, from foster homes, young kids, well, not so young sometimes, and working in semi-slavery conditions. It's a press release of the European Labour Authority. And why they did that? Because it was cheap. And that was the lesson of the pandemic, that the people that are essential for our societies, the nurses, the care workers, waste workers, and so on and so forth, are really valued very low in the wages. So we need to somehow readdress our priorities. And again, I really don't think that only with nice words and talks and passion and common sense. So I think that these kind of talks, these kind of discussions, this kind of work that you do at the local level in Carla, or like as a businessman trying to do that, needs to trickle down into legislation that makes the environment for your business, for your projects, to thrive. Shouldn't use labels, but okay. Do we want a low-cost society, or we want an added value society? And that has to be a societal choice. And I think here in this discussion, we pretty much all hinting at one of the two choices, but that needs to be really the common push.
If we have more reuse, repair, upcycling, we have more jobs locally for our own population that are good and interesting jobs, and we solve a whole different problem with that we have, that manufacturing is going offshore. Vienna is so loving with our trash.
Yeah, we take our kids to the Müllhof and we're proud of this.
Yeah, and I can only recommend the waste incinerator. They do tours, public tours. You can do them. Everyone can do them. So it's very highly recommended. And I just did it not that long ago, and they said about 90% of school children in Vienna at some point go through that tour, which is super important, I think. But they also said, help us have less work.
We have tried this consumerist society for quite some time, arguably, let's say a good, 150, 200 years in development. It hasn't worked out. We can see that now. It's very clear. There's this attitude, and I can feel it even within my own lifetime, which is not that little, but also not too much. Like 40 years is not all the world. It's not historical times in that sense. How it has changed. So I feel like I'm being infantilized in this consumerist approach, where I'm not responsible for anything, don't have to think about anything, everything is ready-made for me. And the problems, what are you gonna do? And I think, for me at least, this is not a good way to exist in the world, because I feel so extremely powerless about things, not just trash, a lot of things, but I think it also has a kind of underlying attitude or even, I would say, a political message about you not having to care for stuff.
I think in harmony with this, I love that quote which says, when you say you throw something out, think about that there's no out. That's still our place where we live. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a super important thing. And also how there's no planet B. So it's all, even if it's just 8% individual responsibility, but also individuals are eventually construction workers and miners. So just think about this.
There is a planet B. Elon Musk is going to take
True.
our trash to
Especially
Mars.
after yesterday.
Pablo, anything we haven't mentioned and you want to add?
Every time there is a push for more recycling or more circular economy, there is a strong corporate lobby against of like very few actors who are, at the end of the day, you scratch a little bit, like very strongly intervened by investment funds in tax havens. So it has to be put in those terms. I mean, I don't know how realistic it is to take like trash to the sun and then burn it as a big incinerator that runs for free. But we need to really be aware of there is this corporate push, because any change in legislation, any change in the production process is seen as a commercial handicap. Like we have a big push to ban forever chemicals in our products. And of course, they're saying that will cost money and jobs are at risk and so on and so forth. And we really need to combat this idea. It's like, well, no, jobs are not at risk. In fact, from 2000 to 2021, the jobs in the recycled sector have grown, but they haven't grown enough to actually for the needs that we are actually have to tackle. So jobs can be created. The issue is that they need to be highly paid, good quality, and respected jobs. And then we are talking about the possibility of having a circular economy sector that actually allows us to reuse things and to reduce waste and to, have these initiatives, because I think that would be extremely creative as a sector, but it needs to have, public funding, public backing, public support that ensure that this is long term. And the problem here is everything is short term. Everything is for the next financial year and we need to change that logic.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for taking the time. I hope to see you in a nice, exciting garbage dump at some point. sort your own garbage? Do you compost religiously, or does throwing anything in the communal give you some guilty pleasure? Would you go to a garbage yard to browse used stuff? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're rummaging down there, give us a like and subscribe to the channel. This talk show is presented by Eurzine and Display Europe. This talk show is co-funded by the Creative Europe program of the European Union and the European Cultural Foundation. Importantly, the views and opinions expressed here are those of the speakers and the authors only, and they do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the European Education and Culture Executive Agency. Neither the European Union nor EACA can be held responsible for them. Not that we would mind them taking advice from us. We also thank Café Cafésatz for hosting us.